Ethan Cole disappeared on November 15, 1985, during what was supposed to be a routine 3-day hunting expedition in the remote wilderness areas surrounding Fairbanks, Alaska. The 34-year-old experienced hunter had left his home at approximately 6:30 a.m. that morning, telling his wife Margaret that he planned to track deer in the northern sectors of the Chena River State Recreation Area. According to Margaret Cole, her husband had been planning this particular hunting trip for over 2 weeks. Ethan was very methodical about his preparations, she told investigators during the initial missing person report. He had checked weather conditions, studied maps of the area, and even spoke with other local hunters about recent animal movements in that region. The couple had been married for 8 years, and Margaret described her husband as someone who never took unnecessary risks in the wilderness. Ethan worked as a maintenance supervisor for the Alaska Railroad Corporation, a position he had held for 6 years. His supervisor, Robert Hayes, described him as reliable and punctual. Ethan rarely called in sick and always showed up when scheduled, Hayes stated in his official testimony. He was supposed to return to work on November 18th, which was a Monday. When he didn't show up that morning, we knew something was wrong because he had never missed work without calling. The Cole family had lived in Fairbanks since 1979, when Ethan transferred from Anchorage for his railroad job. Neighbors on their street described the couple as quiet and friendly. They kept to themselves mostly, but Ethan would always wave and stop to chat if you ran into him outside, said Dorothy Richardson, who lived 2 houses down from the Coles. He was known in the neighborhood as someone who could fix almost anything mechanical. According to police reports, Ethan had extensive experience in Alaska's wilderness areas. He had been hunting since his teenage years and had moved to Alaska specifically for the outdoor opportunities. His brother-in-law, James Peterson, described Ethan as cautious and well-prepared. He never went into the woods without proper gear and supplies, Peterson told investigators. Ethan carried emergency equipment, knew how to navigate, and understood wilderness survival better than most people. On the morning of his departure, Margaret Cole reported that her husband followed his usual routine. He had packed his hunting gear the night before, including his Winchester Model 70 rifle, camping equipment, and enough food supplies for 4 days. He always packed extra food and supplies, just in case weather conditions changed or he decided to stay longer, Margaret explained to police. The rifle, according to family records, had belonged to Ethan for over 10 years and bore his initials EC carved into the wooden stock. Ethan had informed several people about his hunting plans. Besides his wife, he had mentioned the trip to co-workers at the railroad and to Tom Bradley, the owner of Bradley's Sporting Goods, where Ethan regularly purchased ammunition and supplies. He came in on November 13th to buy rifle cartridges and asked about recent reports from hunters in the Chena River area, Bradley recalled during police interviews. Nothing unusual about the conversation. He seemed in good spirits and confident about the trip. The area where Ethan planned to hunt was familiar territory for him. According to hunting licenses and registration records, he had obtained permits for the same general region in previous years. Local game warden Michael Stevens confirmed that the Chena River State Recreation Area was popular among experienced hunters. It's challenging terrain but not dangerous for someone with proper experience and equipment, Stevens explained to investigators. Hunters regularly use that area without incident. Margaret Cole's last conversation with her husband occurred around 6:15 a.m. on November 15th, just before he loaded his truck and departed. He kissed me goodbye and said he would radio in each evening around 8 o'clock to let me know he was safe, she reported to police. This was his standard practice during hunting trips. He carried a handheld CB radio specifically for check-ins. Ethan drove a 1982 Ford F-150 pickup truck, which he had equipped with additional off-road tires for wilderness access. According to vehicle registration records, the truck was in good mechanical condition. His usual practice, according to family members, was to park at established access points and then hike to his preferred hunting locations carrying his gear in a military-style backpack. The hunting season was in full swing during mid-November 1985, and several other hunters were active in the same general area. Weather conditions on November 15th were reported as clear with temperatures around 22 degrees Fahrenheit. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game had issued no special warnings or advisories for the region. Ethan's employer confirmed that he had requested time off for the hunting trip well in advance. His work schedule showed that he was not expected back until November 18th, giving him a full weekend for his expedition. Railroad records indicated that Ethan had used similar time-off requests for hunting trips in previous years without any problems. Friends and co-workers described Ethan as someone who enjoyed solitude in the wilderness, but was never reckless. He liked the challenge of tracking and the quiet of being alone in nature, said fellow railroad employee David Martinez. But Ethan was smart about safety. He understood that Alaska wilderness demands respect and preparation. The CB radio Ethan carried was a standard handheld unit with a range of approximately 15 miles under ideal conditions. According to the manual for his specific radio model, the device was capable of reaching base stations or other radios over longer distances depending on terrain and atmospheric conditions. Margaret Cole confirmed that her husband had successfully used the same radio during previous hunting trips to maintain contact. On the evening of November 15th, Margaret waited for her husband's scheduled 8 o'clock radio call. When no communication came through, she initially attributed the silence to radio difficulties, or her husband being in a location with poor signal reception. "I wasn't immediately worried," she later told investigators. "Sometimes the radio didn't work well depending on where he was camping." However, when no contact came on November 16th or 17th, Margaret Cole began calling friends and family members to ask if they had heard from Ethan. By Sunday evening, November 17th, she decided to contact local authorities to report her husband as overdue from his hunting trip. The initial missing person report was filed on November 18th, 1985, when Ethan failed to return to work as scheduled. Alaska State Troopers classified the case as a missing hunter, a situation they encountered regularly during hunting season. However, the complete absence of any communication from an experienced outdoorsman raised immediate concerns among investigators familiar with such cases. Margaret Cole contacted the Alaska State Troopers at 9:15 a.m. on November 18th, 1985, after her husband failed to report for his scheduled shift at the Alaska Railroad Corporation. According to the official missing person report filed that morning, she explained that Ethan had been due to return from his hunting trip the previous evening and had never missed work without prior notification. Trooper Sergeant William Murphy was assigned as the primary investigator on the case. In his initial report, Murphy noted that while missing hunter cases were common during Alaska's hunting season, several factors about Ethan Cole's disappearance warranted immediate attention. The subject was described as highly experienced in wilderness survival and had maintained consistent communication patterns during previous hunting expeditions, Murphy wrote in his case file. The first step in the investigation involved locating Ethan's pickup truck. Margaret Cole provided investigators with details about her husband's planned route and typical hunting locations. Based on this information, search teams focused on known access points to the Chena River State Recreation Area. On November 19th, Alaska State Troopers located Ethan's 1982 Ford F-150 at a trailhead approximately 37 miles northeast of Fairbanks. According to the police report, the vehicle was parked in a standard position that hunters typically used for wilderness access. The truck was locked, and investigators found no signs of struggle or unusual circumstances around the vehicle. Inside the truck, officers discovered maps of the hunting area with several locations marked in pencil, along with spare clothing and additional supplies that Ethan had apparently decided not to carry with him. The discovery of the truck prompted an expanded search operation. Alaska State Troopers requested assistance from local search and rescue volunteers, and by November 20th, over 40 people were involved in the effort to locate the missing hunter. Search Coordinator Lieutenant James Anderson organized teams to cover different sectors of the wilderness area, where Ethan was believed to have been hunting. Volunteers included experienced hunters and outdoorsmen from the Fairbanks area, who were familiar with the terrain. "We had people who knew every trail and camping spot in that region," said volunteer coordinator Sarah Mitchell. "If Ethan was injured or stranded somewhere, we felt confident we could find him within a reasonable time frame." Search teams used established protocols for missing hunter cases. Groups of 4 to 6 volunteers were assigned specific grid sections and instructed to look for any signs of human presence, including campsites, footprints, equipment, or clothing. Each team carried radio equipment to maintain contact with the central command post that had been established at the trailhead where Ethan's truck was found. On November 21st, searchers made their first significant discovery. A team led by local hunter Ralph Torres found what appeared to be a temporary campsite, approximately 3 miles from where Ethan's truck had been parked. The site contained evidence of recent use, including a cleared area where a tent had been pitched and the remains of a small campfire. Alaska State Troopers processed the campsite as potential evidence. According to their report, the fire pit contained ashes and partially burned wood that appeared to be several days old. Investigators also found boot prints in the surrounding area that were consistent with the size and tread pattern of boots that Margaret Cole identified as similar to what her husband typically wore while hunting. However, no personal belongings or hunting equipment were discovered at the campsite. The absence of any gear or supplies was unusual, noted Trooper Murphy in his report. Hunters typically leave some equipment at base camp, especially heavier items they don't need, while actively tracking animals. Search efforts continued throughout the week of November 21st through 28th. Teams expanded their coverage area to include regions further from the original trailhead, operating under the theory that Ethan might have traveled greater distances than initially estimated. Weather conditions during this period were challenging, with temperatures dropping below zero and several inches of snowfall that covered any tracks or evidence that might have existed. During the expanded search, volunteers made contact with other hunters who had been in the same general area during mid-November. 3 separate hunting parties reported that they had been active in the Chena River region around the time of Ethan's disappearance, but none recalled seeing him or his distinctive red and black jacket that Margaret Cole had described to investigators. Local game warden Michael Stevens interviewed hunters who had obtained permits for the same area during November 1985. According to his report, 12 other individuals or groups had been authorized to hunt in overlapping territories during the time frame when Ethan disappeared. Follow-up interviews with these hunters yielded no useful information about Ethan's whereabouts or activities. On November 24th, search teams received what initially appeared to be a breakthrough. A volunteer searcher reported hearing what sounded like distant radio transmissions while working in a sector approximately 5 miles northeast of Ethan's abandoned truck. The transmission was unclear, but the searcher believed he heard someone attempting to make contact using standard CB radio protocols. Alaska State Troopers immediately dispatched additional teams to the area where the radio signal had been detected. Searchers spent the following day attempting to locate the source of the transmission, but no additional signals were heard. Technical analysis of the report concluded that the volunteer might have picked up radio traffic from other search teams, or from truckers using CB radios on distant highways. As the search entered its second week, Alaska State Troopers expanded their investigation beyond the immediate wilderness area. Investigators began considering alternative scenarios, including the possibility that Ethan had left the hunting area voluntarily or had encountered circumstances that took him to a different location. Margaret Cole participated in multiple interviews during this phase of the investigation. According to case files, she provided detailed information about her husband's habits, his mental state before the trip, and any possible reasons he might have had to alter his planned itinerary. She was cooperative and appeared genuinely concerned for her husband's welfare, Trooper Murphy noted in his report. Financial records examined during the investigation showed no unusual activity in Ethan's bank accounts. His payroll checks from the Alaska Railroad Corporation remained uncashed, and there were no credit card transactions after November 15th. This information supported the theory that Ethan had not voluntarily left the hunting area and traveled elsewhere. On November 29th, the official search operation was scaled back due to worsening weather conditions and the approaching winter season. Lieutenant Anderson announced that active searching would be suspended until spring conditions allowed for safer operations. "We covered over 200 square miles of wilderness terrain," Anderson stated in his final search report. "No evidence was found to indicate Mr. Cole's current location or what might have happened to him." The case remained active with Alaska State Troopers, but the investigation shifted to following up on any new information that might emerge from the public or from hunters who might encounter evidence during future trips to the area. Missing person flyers with Ethan's photograph and description were distributed to sporting goods stores, hunting lodges, and other locations frequented by outdoorsmen throughout central Alaska. Margaret Cole continued to hope for her husband's return or for information about his fate. According to family friends, she maintained contact with investigators and regularly asked about any developments in the case. She never gave up believing that someone would eventually find answers about what happened to Ethan, said neighbor Dorothy Richardson. By December 1985, the Ethan Cole case had become one of several unsolved missing person cases on file with Alaska State Troopers. The combination of harsh weather, vast wilderness terrain, and the complete absence of evidence made the case particularly challenging for investigators. In his final report for the year, Trooper Murphy classified the disappearance as suspicious due to Ethan's experience level and the unusual circumstances surrounding his vanishing without any trace. The Ethan Cole case remained dormant for nearly 3 decades until May 12, 2015, when 2 wilderness photographers made an unexpected discovery that would reopen one of Alaska's most puzzling missing person investigations. David Chen and Marcus Williams, both freelance photographers from Seattle, were documenting remote cabin structures in the Alaska wilderness for a historical preservation project when they encountered an abandoned structure approximately 60 miles northwest of where Ethan Cole had originally disappeared. According to the photographer's statement to Alaska State Troopers, the cabin was located in an extremely remote area that required a 2-day hike from the nearest accessible trail. "We were looking for authentic frontier-era buildings that might have historical significance," Chen explained to investigators. This particular cabin was marked on some old territorial maps from the early 1900s, but we weren't sure if it still existed. The structure was a single-room log cabin measuring approximately 12 by 16 feet, constructed in a style typical of early Alaska homesteaders. Williams, who had experience with historical architecture, estimated that the building dated to the 1920s or 1930s based on construction techniques and materials. It was in remarkably good condition considering its age and isolation, Williams reported. Someone had clearly maintained it over the years. Upon entering the cabin, the photographers immediately noticed several items that seemed inconsistent with the building's apparent age. Chen's initial photographs, which were later submitted as evidence, showed modern camping equipment, relatively recent food containers, and other supplies that indicated the cabin had been used within the past several decades rather than abandoned since territorial days. The most significant discovery occurred when Williams moved some equipment that had been stacked against the cabin's rear wall. Behind the gear, leaning against the logs in what appeared to be a carefully positioned arrangement, was a hunting rifle. Chen immediately recognized it as a Winchester Model 70, a popular hunting rifle, and noticed that initials had been carved into the wooden stock. "We photographed everything exactly as we found it before touching anything," Chen stated in his report. The rifle appeared to have been deliberately placed and maintained. It was clean, showed no signs of rust or weather damage, and looked like it had been recently cared for. The photographers documented their find extensively before departing the area. Upon returning to Fairbanks, they researched the territorial maps that had led them to the cabin and discovered references to a homesteader named Marcus Hale, who had claimed property in that region during the 1940s. This information prompted them to contact Alaska State Troopers with their discovery. Detective Lieutenant Patricia Rodriguez was assigned to investigate the photographer's report. Rodriguez had been with Alaska State Troopers for 15 years and was familiar with cold cases involving missing persons in wilderness areas. "When I saw the photographs of the rifle with initials carved in the stock, I immediately thought about unsolved missing hunter cases," Rodriguez stated in her report. A search of Alaska State Trooper files revealed that the initials EC matched those described in the 1985 missing person case of Ethan Cole. Margaret Cole, who had remarried and was now Margaret Peterson, was contacted to examine photographs of the rifle. She positively identified it as her first husband's hunting weapon. "I remember when he carved those initials," she told investigators. "He did it shortly after we were married using a small knife he kept in his tackle box." Alaska State Troopers organized an expedition to the remote cabin location on May 20, 2015. The team included Detective Rodriguez, forensic technician Robert Chang, and 2 guides familiar with the difficult terrain. The round trip to the cabin required 4 days due to the challenging access route and the need to carefully document all evidence found at the scene. Upon reaching the cabin, investigators began a systematic examination of the structure and its contents. Chang's forensic report documented over 40 items found inside the building, ranging from camping supplies to personal effects that spanned several decades. The cabin showed clear signs of long-term intermittent use, Chang noted. Some items appeared to date from the 1980s, while others were more recent. The Winchester rifle remained in the exact position where the photographers had found it. Chang's examination revealed that the weapon had been meticulously maintained despite its age. The rifle showed no signs of exposure to weather or neglect, he reported. All metal surfaces were clean and showed evidence of recent oil treatment. The action operated smoothly, indicating regular maintenance. More detailed examination of the rifle revealed additional evidence. Under magnification, Chang discovered scratches and marks on the trigger guard and barrel that were inconsistent with normal use or maintenance. The marks appeared to be consistent with metal-on-metal contact, possibly from restraints or binding materials, Chang documented in his forensic report. Investigators then began a thorough search of the cabin's interior, removing floorboards and examining areas that might contain hidden evidence. Beneath loose planking near the cabin's center, they discovered several items that had been concealed: lengths of rusted chain, metal rings that appeared to be anchor points, and a dented metal cup. The chain sections were approximately 6 feet in length and showed significant rust and corrosion, consistent with having been buried or hidden for many years. Chang's analysis indicated that the chains had been secured to heavy iron rings that had been driven into the cabin's floor support beams. The arrangement suggested a restraint system designed to secure someone within the cabin, Chang reported. Detective Rodriguez initiated a comprehensive background investigation into Marcus Hale, the homesteader associated with the cabin property. Records research revealed that Hale had filed a homestead claim in the area in 1943 and had lived there intermittently until the late 1980s. Court records showed that Hale had been involved in several disputes with neighbors and had a reputation for unpredictable behavior. Local residents who remembered Hale from decades earlier described him as a reclusive individual who rarely came to town and was known for aggressive reactions to any perceived intrusions on his property. Marcus was not someone you wanted to encounter alone in the woods, stated retired trapper William Foster, who had known Hale during the 1970s and 1980s. He was suspicious of everyone and had a mean streak when he felt threatened. Further investigation revealed that Hale himself had been reported missing in January 1986, just 2 months after Ethan Cole's disappearance. According to the missing person report filed at that time, Hale had failed to collect supplies he had ordered from a Fairbanks merchant and had not been seen at his usual locations around the cabin area. The 1986 investigation into Hale's disappearance had been minimal due to his reclusive lifestyle and the assumption that he might have simply relocated without informing anyone. Marcus Hale was known to disappear for months at a time, the original investigating officer had noted. His absence did not initially raise concerns among people who knew his habits. Alaska State Troopers reopened both the Cole and Hale missing person cases as potentially connected investigations. Detective Rodriguez coordinated with the Cold Case Unit to review all available evidence from both disappearances and to determine if there were connections that had been missed in the original investigations. Analysis of the timeline revealed several significant factors. Ethan Cole had disappeared on November 15, 1985, in an area approximately 60 miles from Hale's cabin. Hale was last seen in early December 1985 and was reported missing in January 1986. The proximity of dates and locations suggested a possible connection between the two disappearances. Forensic analysis of the chains and restraint materials found in the cabin provided additional evidence. Laboratory testing revealed traces of organic material on the metal that was consistent with prolonged contact with clothing or leather. Carbon dating of organic residue found on the chains indicated that the materials had been in place during the mid-1980s timeframe. Detective Rodriguez also discovered that Hale had been questioned briefly during the original search for Ethan Cole in 1985. According to the case file, a search team had encountered Hale near his cabin area and had asked if he had seen any signs of the missing hunter. Hale had reportedly been cooperative, but had claimed no knowledge of Ethan Cole or his hunting activities. The discovery of the rifle and evidence at Hale's cabin prompted Alaska State Troopers to classify the Ethan Cole case as a likely kidnapping and presumed murder. Detective Rodriguez announced that the investigation was focusing on the theory that Hale had encountered Cole in the wilderness and had taken him to the remote cabin against his will. Margaret Peterson, Ethan's former wife, was informed of the developments in the case. According to Detective Rodriguez, Peterson expressed both relief at finally having answers about her first husband's fate and sadness at confirmation that he had not survived his disappearance. She had hoped for 30 years that Ethan might still be alive somewhere, Rodriguez reported. Learning the truth was difficult but provided some closure. The investigation expanded to include searches for any additional evidence that might be found in the areas surrounding Hale's cabin. Ground-penetrating radar equipment was brought to the site to search for possible burial locations, and cadaver dogs were used to examine the broader area around the cabin structure. These expanded searches yielded additional evidence supporting the theory that Ethan Cole had been held at the cabin. Investigators found remnants of clothing buried in a shallow depression approximately 100 yards from the cabin. The fabric pieces were consistent with the type of hunting clothes that Ethan had been wearing when he disappeared, according to descriptions provided by his wife. Alaska State Troopers also conducted interviews with residents of the few scattered communities in the region, seeking anyone who might have information about activities around Hale's cabin during the 1980s. Several individuals recalled seeing smoke from the cabin area during winter months, when Hale would typically have been elsewhere, but no one had investigated these observations at the time. The case attracted significant media attention when Alaska State Troopers announced that the 30-year-old missing person case had been reclassified as a suspected kidnapping and murder. Local newspapers and television stations covered the story extensively, prompting several additional witnesses to come forward with information about Marcus Hale and his behavior during the 1980s. One significant development came from retired hunting guide Thomas Bradley, who contacted investigators after seeing news coverage of the case. Bradley reported that in late November 1985, he had encountered a man matching Hale's description, behaving strangely near hunting areas where Ethan Cole might have been active. The guy was watching the trail from concealment and acted very suspicious when he realized I had seen him, Bradley told Detective Rodriguez. Detective Rodriguez and the Alaska State Troopers forensic team spent the summer of 2015 conducting the most comprehensive investigation possible into the events that had occurred at Marcus Hale's remote cabin 30 years earlier. Based on the physical evidence recovered from the site and the timeline established through witness interviews and official records, investigators were able to reconstruct a likely sequence of events that explained Ethan Cole's disappearance and his final weeks of life in disturbing detail that would finally provide answers to questions that had haunted his family for 3 decades. According to the official case report filed in September 2015, investigators concluded that Marcus Hale had been systematically monitoring hunting activities in the area around his cabin during November 1985. Evidence suggested that Hale had observed Ethan Cole's hunting activities for several days and had followed him through the wilderness before making direct contact. The radio transmission that Ethan had made on November 15th, reporting that he was being followed by shadows between the trees, was likely his accurate observation of Hale tracking him through the wilderness areas near the remote cabin location. Forensic analysis of the cabin site provided investigators with disturbing details about what had occurred after Ethan's initial capture. The restraint system found beneath the cabin floor had been constructed specifically to secure someone for an extended period of time with no possibility of escape. Based on the wear patterns observed on the metal chains and anchor points, forensic technician Chang estimated that the restraints had been used regularly over a period of several weeks or possibly months during the winter of 1985 and 1986. The evidence clearly suggests that Mr. Cole was held in the cabin for a significant period after his initial disappearance, Detective Rodriguez stated in her comprehensive final report. The condition of the restraint materials, the systematic arrangement of items in the cabin, and the physical modifications made to the structure indicate that this was not a brief encounter, but an extended captivity situation that lasted for many weeks during the harsh Alaska winter months. The careful maintenance and prominent positioning of Ethan's rifle presented investigators with additional insights into Hale's psychological state during the period of captivity. Rather than disposing of the weapon, selling it, or keeping it for his own practical use, Hale had preserved it in pristine condition and displayed it prominently against the cabin wall where it would be immediately visible to anyone entering the structure. Psychological consultants who reviewed the case suggested that this behavior indicated Hale's deep obsession with his victim and his desire to create some form of memorial or trophy display. Dr. Sarah Williams, a forensic psychologist who consulted extensively on the case, explained that the preservation of the rifle was consistent with certain types of predatory behavior patterns that had been documented in similar cases involving extended captivity situations. The careful maintenance and prominent display of the victim's weapon suggests that the perpetrator derived ongoing psychological satisfaction from possessing items that belonged to his victim, Dr. Williams noted in her detailed report. This type of behavior often indicates a desire to maintain psychological control over the victim even after death, treating personal belongings as trophies or constant reminders of the criminal acts that had been committed. Dr. Williams further explained that the positioning of the rifle suggested that Hale viewed it as a centerpiece of his psychological connection to Ethan. The fact that he cleaned and maintained the weapon regularly over 30 years indicates an ongoing relationship with the memory of his victim, she observed. This wasn't simply keeping a useful tool, but rather preserving something that held deep psychological significance for the perpetrator. Investigators also determined that Marcus Hale's own disappearance in early 1986 was directly connected to the conclusion of Ethan Cole's captivity period. Based on the timeline established through physical evidence analysis and witness accounts from the period, Alaska state troopers theorized that Ethan had died in the cabin during late December 1985 or early January 1986, and that Hale had subsequently abandoned the area permanently, possibly fleeing to avoid detection or investigation by law enforcement authorities. The search for Ethan's physical remains became a high-priority focus during the extended summer investigation period. Specialized ground-penetrating radar equipment was transported to the remote site to conduct comprehensive surveys of areas within reasonable walking distance of the cabin where Hale might have disposed of the body. The radar surveys identified several areas of disturbed soil that appeared inconsistent with natural terrain formations, suggesting possible burial sites that warranted further detailed investigation. Extensive excavation efforts during July and August 2015 focused on the most promising radar anomalies identified during the initial surveys. Teams of investigators and volunteers spent weeks carefully digging in the identified areas, but the extensive excavation operations did not recover human remains or additional physical evidence related to Ethan's final disposition. Detective Rodriguez noted that the harsh Alaska climate conditions, including extreme temperature variations and active wildlife presence over 30 years, would have made preservation of remains extremely unlikely, even under the most favorable circumstances for preservation. After 3 decades in the Alaska wilderness environment, with exposure to extreme weather conditions and wildlife activity, we did not realistically expect to recover physical remains, Rodriguez explained to media representatives covering the case extensively. Our primary focus was on gathering enough circumstantial and physical evidence to determine what happened to Mr. Cole and to provide definitive answers to his family about his fate after 30 years of painful uncertainty and speculation. The search teams also discovered additional evidence in the areas surrounding the cabin that supported the theory of Ethan's extended captivity. Approximately 200 yards from the main structure, investigators found remnants of clothing buried under years of accumulated debris and vegetation. Laboratory analysis confirmed that the fabric fragments were consistent with the type of hunting clothes that Ethan had been wearing when he disappeared, according to descriptions provided by his wife and documented in the original missing person report. The expanded investigation into Marcus Hale's background revealed a clear pattern of increasing social isolation and antisocial behavior that had developed progressively over many years, leading up to 1985. Extensive interviews with people who had known Hale during the 1970s and early 1980s described a man who had become increasingly suspicious of any outsiders entering what he considered his territory, and more aggressively confrontational in defending what he perceived as his property and domain in the wilderness areas. Retired Alaska State Trooper Carl Morrison, who had been stationed in the Fairbanks area during the 1980s, and was personally familiar with Hale's reputation among local law enforcement, recalled several documented incidents involving increasingly confrontational behavior toward other wilderness users. Marcus had multiple serious confrontations with hunters and hikers who he claimed were trespassing on his property or in areas he considered his exclusive territory, Morrison told investigators during detailed interviews. We had to respond to formal complaints about him threatening people with weapons on at least 3 separate occasions between 1982 and 1984, and those were just the incidents that got reported to authorities. Morrison also revealed that Hale had been the subject of informal discussions among Alaska state troopers regarding his potential for escalating behavior. We had concerns about Marcus, but he never crossed the line far enough to warrant arrest, Morrison explained. He was always careful to stay just within legal boundaries, which in retrospect suggests he was more calculating than we realized at the time. The official case files documented that Hale had been formally warned by law enforcement officers about his aggressive behavior toward other wilderness users on multiple occasions, but he had never been arrested or charged with any serious crimes that would have resulted in incarceration or mandatory psychological evaluation. His extremely remote location and the significant difficulty of accessing his cabin had made ongoing monitoring of his activities completely impractical for Alaska state troopers, given their limited resources and the vast territorial coverage area they were responsible for patrolling. Additional investigation revealed that Hale had been questioned briefly during the original 1985 search operation for Ethan Cole, a detail that took on sinister significance in light of the later discoveries. According to the archived case file, a volunteer search team had encountered Hale near his cabin area during the expanded search efforts and had specifically asked if he had seen any signs of the missing hunter or had any information that might assist in the ongoing search operation. Hale had reportedly been cooperative and helpful during this interaction, but had claimed complete ignorance about Ethan Cole or his hunting activities in the region. Detective Rodriguez noted in her detailed analysis that Hale's ability to appear cooperative and helpful during the original investigation, while simultaneously holding Ethan captive at his nearby cabin, demonstrated a level of psychological manipulation and calculated deception that indicated premeditated criminal behavior rather than a spontaneous act of malice or temporary mental breakdown. The fact that he could interact normally with search teams while holding Mr. Cole captive shows a degree of planning and psychological control that makes this case particularly disturbing, Rodriguez observed. The investigation also revealed disturbing details about the conditions inside the cabin during the period of Ethan's captivity. Analysis of items found in the structure suggested that Hale had maintained a routine of providing minimal food and water to keep his victim alive for an extended period. The metal cup found beneath the floorboards showed signs of regular use, and residue analysis indicated it had been used for water consumption over many weeks. Forensic examination of the cabin's interior revealed additional evidence of long-term occupancy by 2 people during the winter months of 1985-1986. Wood consumption patterns in the fireplace indicated regular heating throughout the winter, and food container remnants suggested that Hale had stockpiled supplies specifically to sustain 2 people for an extended period. The evidence suggests that this was not an impulsive crime, but something that Hale had planned and prepared for in advance, noted forensic technician Chang. Further analysis of the cabin revealed that Hale had made specific modifications to the structure to accommodate his plans for holding someone captive. The anchor points for the chains had been carefully installed into the cabin's support beams, requiring tools and planning that indicated premeditation. Additionally, investigators found evidence that windows had been modified to prevent escape attempts, with metal bars that appeared to have been installed sometime in the early 1980s. The investigation team also discovered a disturbing collection of items that suggested Hale had been planning similar activities for some time before encountering Ethan. Hidden in a concealed compartment within the cabin walls, investigators found rope, additional restraint materials, and hunting gear that had belonged to other individuals. While they could not definitively connect these items to other missing person cases, the discovery suggested that Ethan may not have been Hale's only victim. Margaret Peterson, Ethan's former wife who had remarried in the years following his disappearance, met with Detective Rodriguez in October 2015. to receive a comprehensive briefing about the investigation's findings and conclusions. According to Rodriguez's detailed report of this meeting, Peterson expressed profound gratitude for the extensive efforts made to solve the case, while acknowledging the extreme difficulty of learning the specific details about her first husband's final weeks of life. She stated that knowing the truth, even though it was extremely painful and disturbing, was significantly better than 30 years of constant uncertainty and wondering what had happened, Rodriguez documented in her case notes. Mrs. Peterson indicated that the family had imagined many different scenarios over the years, and that having definitive answers, regardless of how difficult they were to accept, provided a form of closure that had been missing for 3 decades. Peterson also revealed to investigators that Ethan had mentioned feeling watched during previous hunting trips in the months leading up to his disappearance. He told me a few times that summer that he had the feeling someone was observing him when he was out hunting, Peterson recalled. I thought it was just normal wilderness paranoia, but now I wonder if Hale had been stalking him for some time before making his move. The extended Cole family's reaction to the investigation results was complex and varied among different family members. While they universally appreciated finally having concrete answers about Ethan's disappearance, many family members struggled emotionally with the knowledge that he had survived for weeks or months in captivity before his death, rather than dying quickly from an accident or animal attack as they had hoped might have been the case. Ethan's brother, Robert Cole, told local media representatives that the family found some measure of comfort in knowing that Ethan had not died immediately from an accident or animal attack as they had feared for many years, but that learning about his extended captivity was extremely difficult to process emotionally. We always hoped that if something bad had happened, it was quick and he didn't suffer, Robert Cole stated during a television interview. Learning that he was held captive for weeks is devastating, but at least we finally know what happened to him and can put him to rest properly. The investigation also uncovered evidence suggesting that Ethan had attempted to escape from his captivity on multiple occasions. Scratches and wear marks found on the interior walls of the cabin indicated repeated attempts to break free from the restraints or to damage the structure enough to create an escape route. These findings provided some comfort to the family, as they indicated that Ethan had not given up hope and had continued fighting for his freedom until the end. Analysis of the scratch marks suggested that Ethan had been able to partially free himself on at least one occasion, as investigators found evidence of makeshift tools fashioned from cabin materials that could have been used to work on the restraints. However, the reinforcement of the restraint system indicated that Hale had discovered these escape attempts and had taken measures to prevent future efforts. Alaska State Troopers officially closed the Ethan Cole missing person case in November 2015, exactly 30 years after his original disappearance from the hunting area. The case was formally classified as a kidnapping and murder, with Marcus Hale identified as the suspected perpetrator based on the totality of physical evidence, witness testimony, and circumstantial evidence gathered during the comprehensive investigation. Since Hale himself had been missing and presumed dead for nearly 30 years, no criminal charges could be filed, but the case was marked as solved based on the available evidence meeting the standard of proof required for case closure. The successful resolution of the Cole case prompted Alaska State Troopers Administration to initiate a comprehensive review of other cold cases involving missing persons in remote wilderness areas throughout the state. Detective Rodriguez was assigned to lead this review process and noted that the Cole investigation demonstrated the critical importance of preserving physical evidence and continuing to follow up on cold cases even decades after the original incident occurred. This case clearly shows that sometimes answers are out there waiting to be discovered, even after many years have passed, Rodriguez stated during a press conference announcing the case closure. We hope that other families with missing loved ones will see this resolution as encouragement to never give up hope for eventual resolution of their cases, regardless of how much time has passed since their loved one disappeared. The review of other cold cases prompted by the Cole investigation led to the reopening of 3 additional missing person cases from the 1980s and 1990s that shared similar characteristics. Investigators began examining whether Marcus Hale might have been responsible for other disappearances in remote areas of Alaska, though no definitive connections were established. The remote cabin where Ethan Cole had been held captive was left undisturbed after the completion of the forensic investigation. Alaska state troopers determined that the site had no ongoing evidentiary value for potential future legal proceedings, and that the extreme difficulty of accessing the location made it completely impractical to maintain as a permanently secured area. The cabin remains in its isolated wilderness location, known only to the investigating officers and the two photographers who had originally discovered it during their historical documentation project. Local communities throughout the Fairbanks area followed the case resolution with significant interest and emotional investment. Many longtime residents remembered the original search efforts for Ethan Cole and the widespread concern that had spread through hunting communities when an experienced and well-respected outdoorsman had vanished without any explanation or trace. The revelation that Cole had been the victim of criminal action by another person rather than wilderness circumstances provided a different type of closure for people who had participated in the original search efforts. Tom Bradley, the sporting goods store owner who had sold ammunition to Ethan Cole during his final preparation for the hunting trip, told local media representatives that the case resolution finally answered questions that had bothered him personally for 30 years. "I always wondered what had happened to Ethan because I knew him well as a customer and respected him as an outdoorsman," Bradley stated during a newspaper interview. "He was too experienced and too careful to just get lost or have a serious accident. Learning that he was the victim of someone else makes sense from that perspective, even though it's absolutely terrible to know what he went through." The case resolution also had a significant impact on hunting safety practices in the region. Local hunting organizations began emphasizing the importance of hunting in groups and maintaining regular communication schedules. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game updated their safety recommendations to include warnings about the potential for human threats in remote areas, not just natural dangers. The Alaska State Troopers' final investigation report concluded that the Ethan Cole case demonstrated both the significant challenges inherent in wilderness law enforcement operations and the extraordinary persistence required to solve complex missing person cases in remote areas. Detective Rodriguez formally recommended that future missing person investigations in isolated wilderness areas should include expanded background checks on any individuals known to be living in isolation near the search areas, regardless of whether they initially appear to be cooperative or helpful. The case also highlighted the crucial importance of modern forensic techniques and technology in solving decades-old crimes that had previously seemed impossible to resolve. The ability to analyze microscopic trace evidence from the chains and restraint materials found in the cabin provided crucial physical links between the evidence and the established timeline of Ethan's disappearance that would not have been possible with investigative techniques available in 1985. 30 years after Ethan Cole left his family home for what he had every reason to expect would be a routine and safe hunting trip, his family finally had comprehensive answers about his fate and the circumstances of his death. While the truth was extremely painful and difficult to accept, it provided the definitive closure that had been missing for 3 decades of uncertainty and speculation about what had happened in the Alaska wilderness. The case served as a stark reminder of the unexpected dangers that can exist, even in familiar wilderness areas, and reinforced the importance of remaining constantly vigilant about personal safety procedures when spending time in remote locations. The Winchester rifle that had ultimately led to the case's resolution was returned to the Cole family after the investigation concluded, and according to Detective Rodriguez, the family planned to preserve the rifle as a memorial to Ethan, while acknowledging the difficult circumstances surrounding its recovery and the role it played in finally solving the mystery of his disappearance. The resolution of the Ethan Cole case became a landmark example of successful cold case investigation techniques and was studied by law enforcement agencies throughout Alaska and other states with similar wilderness environments. The case file became part of training materials used to educate investigators about the importance of persistence in cold case work and the potential for new evidence to emerge decades after initial investigations.